The first time I walked into Whitaker and Associates, the senior partner didn't even look up from his desk. He just glanced at my thrift store coat, the scuffed shoes, the way I clutched my purse, and he laughed. "Can I help you, dear? Are you lost?" His voice was syrupy, the kind reserved for children and the elderly. I smiled politely, letting him believe I was just another confused widow, overwhelmed by the world of law and paperwork. He had no idea my name was on the founding documents framed in his own office, or that I'd spent decades building this firm from the ground up, brick by brick, case by case, while he was still learning how to tie a Windsor knot. He didn't know I was here for a reason far more important than he could imagine. My daughter's future, her inheritance, her security, her very sense of belonging was at stake. The people who were supposed to protect her, to guide her, were the very ones plotting to take everything from her. They saw me as a frail, harmless old woman, someone to be pitied or ignored. They didn't see the woman who'd survived heartbreak, who'd raised a child alone, who'd outsmarted men like them her entire life. I let them underestimate me. I let them see what they wanted to see, a woman past her prime, easy to dismiss, easy to deceive. But beneath the surface I was watching, listening, and waiting. Every slight, every smirk, every whispered scheme was another thread in the web I was weaving. They had no idea what I was capable of, or how far I would go to protect my family's legacy. It all started when my daughter brought Preston home for dinner. After my husband died, the world seemed to shrink around me. The house that once rang with laughter and late-night debates became a place of quiet routines and gentle solitude. I filled my days with small comforts, tending the roses in the backyard, reading the morning paper with a cup of strong tea, and volunteering at the local library. Most people in town saw me as a gentle, aging widow, content to fade into the background. They didn't know about the years I spent in law libraries, the late nights drafting contracts, or the battles I fought in boardrooms where I was the only woman at the table. They didn't know that I was the silent partner who'd helped build Whitaker and Associates from a single rented office to the most respected firm in the county. I never flaunted my success. After my husband's illness, I learned the value of privacy. I kept my name off the door, my shares in a trust, and my influence behind the scenes. I wanted my daughter, Emily, to grow up with a sense of normalcy, not the burden of other people's envy or expectations. I raised her to be kind, to work hard, and to trust her instincts. She was my pride and my joy, the reason I'd sacrificed so much. Emily was always quick to see the good in people. She had her father's open heart and my stubborn streak. When she called me one Sunday afternoon, her voice bubbling with excitement, I knew something was different. "Mom, I want you to meet someone," she said. "His name is Preston. He's special. I think you'll really like him." I smiled, listening to her describe him, his quick wit, his ambition, the way he made her laugh. I wanted to be happy for her, but a mother's intuition is a powerful thing. There was a note of nervousness in her voice, a hesitation she tried to hide. I told her to bring him for dinner, to let me see for myself. The night they arrived, I set the table with my best china and made Emily's favorite meal, roast chicken with rosemary, mashed potatoes, and green beans from the garden. I wore a simple dress, nothing fancy, and pulled my hair back in a loose bun. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath and opened the door to a scene that would change everything. Preston was handsome in a polished, practiced way. He wore an expensive suit and a watch that probably cost more than my car. He greeted me with a dazzling smile and a bouquet of lilies, Emily's favorite, not mine, but a thoughtful gesture all the same. His handshake was firm, his eyes quick and assessing. He introduced his parents, Charles and Judith Whitaker, with the air of someone used to making an impression. Charles was tall, with a mane of silver hair and a voice that filled the room. He shook my hand as if he were doing me a favor, his eyes already scanning the house, taking stock of the furniture, the art on the walls, the little details that told the story of my life. Judith was elegant, every hair in place, her perfume subtle but expensive. She smiled, but her eyes were cold, calculating. She complimented my quaint home and immediately suggested a new color for the living room walls. Dinner was a performance from the start. Preston regaled us with stories of his time at law school, the high-profile cases he'd assisted on, and the influential people he'd met at firm events. Charles nodded approvingly, occasionally interjecting with his own tales of courtroom triumphs and business deals. Judith corrected my table manners twice, once for the way I held my fork and once for passing the salt without the pepper. Emily tried to keep the conversation light, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she glanced at me for reassurance. I asked Preston about his work at Whitaker and Associates, and he launched into a monologue about the complexities of estate law, explaining basic concepts as if I were a child. Charles leaned over and said, "Don't worry, Maggie. If you ever need help with your affairs, Preston can walk you through the paperwork. It can be confusing at your age." Judith pursed her lips and added, "It's so important to have someone you trust looking out for you, especially when things get complicated." I smiled and thanked them, letting my voice tremble just a little. "I suppose I am a bit out of my depth with all these legal matters," I said, watching their eyes light up with satisfaction. Emily looked at me, concern flickering across her face, but I squeezed her hand under the table and gave her a reassuring smile. After dinner, as I cleared the dishes, I listened to Charles and Judith discussing their latest charity event, dropping names and making sure I knew just how important they were in the community. Preston offered to help with the dishes, but spent most of the time on his phone, texting someone and laughing quietly to himself. When he thought I wasn't looking, he glanced around the kitchen, his gaze lingering on the mail stacked neatly by the door. That night, after they left, Emily hugged me tightly. "What do you think, Mom?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I told her Preston seemed charming, and his parents were certainly memorable. She laughed, relieved, and told me how much she wanted us all to get along. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I replayed every moment of the evening. The way Charles dismissed my questions, the way Judith corrected me, the way Preston looked at Emily as if she were a prize to be won. I'd seen this before, people who thought they could size me up in a glance, who mistook kindness for weakness, who believed age was the same as ignorance. Years ago, I might have confronted them head on, but I'd learned the value of patience. I'd learned that people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. This time, I decided to let them believe what they wanted. If they saw me as a helpless widow, so be it. I would play the part, watch and wait for their true intentions to surface. I would protect Emily, not by shielding her from the world, but by letting her see it clearly. I would gather evidence, document every slight, and prepare for the moment when the truth would matter most. I walked into the Whitaker home in my plainest dress, ready to play my role perfectly. The Whitaker home was everything I expected: gleaming marble floors, a grand staircase, and art on the walls that looked expensive but impersonal. Judith greeted us at the door, her smile tight, her eyes flicking over my dress and shoes before she ushered us inside. "So glad you could make it, Maggie," she said, her voice as smooth as her silk blouse. "We don't often get to host such distinguished guests." The pause before distinguished was just long enough to sting, but I let it pass, offering a grateful nod. Charles appeared from his study, a glass of scotch in hand, his silver hair perfectly combed. He shook my hand with a grip that was just a little too firm, as if he were testing my strength. "Welcome, Maggie. I hope you're ready for a lively evening. Preston's been telling us all about your daughter's accomplishments." He turned to Emily, beaming, then to Preston, who stood by the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other resting on the mantel beside a set of gold cufflinks. Preston looked every bit the rising star. Tailored suit, expensive watch, shoes polished to a mirror shine. He smiled at Emily, then at me, his gaze lingering just a moment too long. "It's great to finally meet you, Mrs. Ellison. Emily's told me so much about you. I hope you don't mind if I pick your brain about your famous apple pie recipe later." His charm was practiced, but his eyes were calculating, always measuring, always assessing. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, the table set with fine china and crystal glasses. Judith took her place at the head, Charles at the other end, with Emily and Preston on one side and me on the other. The conversation started innocently enough: weather, local news, a few jokes about the traffic. But it didn't take long for the undercurrents to show. "So, Maggie," Charles began, swirling his scotch, "Emily tells us you used to work in law. That must have been interesting." I imagine things have changed a lot since your day. He smiled, but there was a glint in his eye, a challenge. If you ever need help with the paperwork, don't worry. I'll explain it all for you. I smiled, letting my eyes widen just a bit. Thank you, Charles. I do get confused sometimes. All those legal terms, so many Latin words. I'm lucky Emily has Preston to help her navigate it all. I glanced at Preston, who grinned, clearly pleased with himself. Judith watched me closely. Her lips pursed in that way I'd already come to recognize. She corrected me twice before the salad was finished, once for using the wrong fork, and once for passing the bread basket to the left instead of the right. It's the little things that matter, Maggie, she said, her tone gentle but patronizing. We want Emily to feel comfortable in every setting. Preston, meanwhile, took every opportunity to drop hints about his success. He mentioned the new car he'd just leased, the exclusive club he'd joined, and the important clients he was handling at the firm. It's a lot of responsibility, he said, glancing at his father for approval. But I'm up for it. Some people just aren't cut out for the pressure, you know? Emily beamed at him, clearly proud, while I nodded along, asking naive questions. What's it like working with so many important people? Do you ever get nervous in court? Preston laughed, shaking his head. Not really. I guess I was just born for it. Some people need a lot of hand-holding, but I like to take charge. Charles leaned over, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. Don't worry, Maggie. If you ever need help with your affairs, Preston can walk you through the paperwork. It can be confusing at your age. He winked at Preston, who smirked in return. I thanked them, letting my voice tremble just a little. That's very kind. I do get overwhelmed sometimes. Judith smiled, satisfied, and turned the conversation to the upcoming charity gala, making sure to mention the guest list and the exclusive venue. It's important to keep up appearances, she said, glancing at my dress. You never know who you'll meet. Throughout the meal, I catalogued every slight, every backhanded compliment, every time Charles or Judith looked at me as if I were a child. I watched Preston preen, watched Emily glow with pride, watched the Whitakers congratulate themselves on their subtle dominance. Inside, I repeated my mantra. They had no idea. They had no idea who I was, what I'd built, or what I was capable of. They saw a woman past her prime, someone to be managed and pitied. They didn't see the strategist, the survivor, the silent partner who'd helped build their world. After dessert, as we lingered over coffee, Charles leaned in and whispered to Preston, She's sweet, but she needs help. Make sure you keep an eye on her paperwork. Preston nodded, glancing at me with a look that was almost pitying. Emily, oblivious to the undercurrents, squeezed my hand and whispered, Isn't Preston wonderful? I'm so glad you're getting to know his family. I smiled, holding her hand a little tighter, my heart aching for her innocence. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, their true colors emerged. Over the next 2 weeks, the Whitakers' true nature revealed itself in 1,000 small ways. It started with brunch at a trendy cafe, a place where the waiters wore starched aprons and the menu was written in French. Judith insisted on ordering for everyone, waving away my request for something simple. You really must try the eggs en cocotte, Maggie. It's a classic. I know these menus can be a bit overwhelming. She smiled, lips pursed, as if she were doing me a favor. Charles and Preston discussed firm business in low voices, occasionally pausing to explain a legal term or a business concept as if I were a child. It's all very complicated, Maggie, Charles said, patting my hand. But don't worry, Preston can help you with your affairs when the time comes. Emily, eager to please, chimed in, Mom, maybe you should let Preston look over your will. He's really good with this stuff. I smiled, making a mental note. Preston leaned in, lowering his voice. It's just that things can get complicated as we get older. You want to make sure everything is in order for Emily's sake. I'd be happy to review your documents just to be safe. I thanked him, letting my voice tremble ever so slightly. That's very thoughtful, Preston. I suppose I haven't looked at those papers in years. Judith nodded approvingly, her eyes glinting. It's always best to be prepared, Maggie. You never know what might happen. The next humiliation came during a shopping trip. Judith insisted on taking me to an upscale boutique, the kind of place where the saleswomen look you up and down before deciding if you're worth their time. She picked out a series of shapeless, drab dresses, holding them up to my shoulders and frowning. "You want to look dignified, dear, not desperate. At our age, it's best to keep things simple." She handed me a gray cardigan, her lips pursed in disapproval. "This will be perfect for the charity gala. Understated, but appropriate." Preston wandered the store, checking his reflection in every mirror, occasionally flashing his watch or dropping hints about his important meetings. He asked again about my finances, this time in front of Emily. "Have you thought about setting up a trust, Mrs. Ellison? It's the best way to protect your assets. I could help you with the paperwork if you'd like." Emily nodded, echoing his concern. "It might be a good idea, Mom, just to be safe." I tried on the cardigan, letting Judith fuss over the fit, all the while making mental notes. Every comment, every suggestion, every time they spoke about me as if I weren't there, I wrote it all down in a small notebook I kept hidden in my purse. I even started recording some of our conversations on my phone, just in case. The charity event was the worst. Judith made a show of introducing me to the other guests as Emily's mother, who's just getting used to life on her own. She corrected me in front of everyone when I mispronounced a donor's name, then whispered, "Don't worry, Maggie. These things can be confusing." Charles and Preston spent the evening talking shop with the other lawyers, occasionally glancing my way with thinly veiled amusement. At one point, Judith pulled me aside, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Have you ever thought about moving to a retirement community? They have so many activities for people your age. You'd never have to worry about the house again." I let my eyes widen, feigning surprise. "Oh, I suppose that could be nice. But I do love my garden." Judith patted my hand, her smile tight. "Of course, but you shouldn't have to do it all alone. Emily and Preston can help you look into options." Throughout these encounters, I watched as Emily began to echo their concerns. She started asking if I was eating enough, if I needed help with the bills, if I was lonely in the house. She meant well, but I could see the seeds of doubt being planted, watered by Judith's gentle suggestions and Preston's concerned questions. "Maybe it's time to think about the future, Mom," Emily said one evening. "You've done so much for me. Let us help you now," I smiled, hugging her tightly. "Thank you, sweetheart. I appreciate it." Inside, I felt a pang of sadness, but also a surge of determination. I'd seen this pattern before. People who mistake kindness for weakness, who believe age is the same as ignorance. I let them believe what they wanted, all the while gathering evidence, documenting every slight, every humiliation, every attempt to push me aside. Charles and Judith grew bolder, orchestrating small humiliations at every turn. Judith corrected my manners at dinner. Charles explained basic legal concepts as if I'd never set foot in a courtroom, and Preston continued to probe about my will and Emily's inheritance. "It's just that we want to make sure everything is in order," he said, his tone dripping with false concern. "You never know what could happen." I nodded, letting my voice tremble. "You're right, Preston. I suppose I should get my affairs in order." Judith smiled, satisfied, and turned the conversation to the upcoming gala, making sure to mention the exclusive guest list and the importance of keeping up appearances. All the while, I kept my mask in place, letting them believe I was exactly what they wanted me to be. I was no longer just protecting myself. I was protecting Emily's future, even if she couldn't see it yet. I was gathering evidence, building a case, and waiting for the moment when their arrogance would be their undoing. But what happened next crossed a line. It was a Thursday evening when the mask finally slipped. The Whitakers had invited Emily and me for dinner, insisting it was just a casual family night. Judith made her usual show of hospitality, fussing over the table settings and offering me a glass of wine I politely declined. The conversation was light, almost forced, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. After dessert, Emily excused herself to take a call, and Judith disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone in the living room with Charles and Preston. I sat quietly, pretending to be absorbed in a magazine, but my ears were tuned to every word. Charles lowered his voice, glancing over his shoulder to make sure I wasn't listening. "We need to get her signature on the trust transfer by the end of the month," he whispered. "If we wait any longer, she might get suspicious. Preston, you'll handle the paperwork. Make it look official. She's too old to understand the difference. Preston smirked, his confidence oozing. She'll never know. I'll draft the documents tonight. All we need is her signature, and the shares are as good as ours. Emily won't question it if it looks legitimate. My heart pounded, but I kept my face neutral, flipping a page as if I hadn't heard a thing. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about small humiliations or subtle manipulations. They were planning to steal everything I'd built, my shares in the firm, Emily's inheritance, the security I'd spent a lifetime creating. I felt a surge of anger, but also a cold, clear resolve. I could have confronted them right then, exposed their scheme, and called them out in front of Emily. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Emily needed to see the truth for herself, to understand the depths of their deceit. If I acted too soon, they'd twist the story, paint me as paranoid or confused. I needed undeniable proof. Later that night, as the Whitakers busied themselves in the kitchen, I slipped into Charles's study. The door was ajar, and Preston's briefcase sat open on the desk. I hesitated only a moment before searching through the papers. My hands shook as I found what I was looking for, a freshly printed will, my name typed neatly at the top, the signature at the bottom, a crude imitation of my own. The language was clear. All my assets, including my shares in Whitaker and Associates, would transfer to Emily, but with Preston named as sole trustee. In effect, he would control everything. I took photos of the document with my phone, careful to return everything exactly as I'd found it. My mind raced with possibilities. I could end this now, bring the evidence to Emily, confront Charles and Preston in front of the whole family. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Emily's heart was too soft, too trusting. She needed to see their true faces, to witness their greed and arrogance firsthand. As I left the study, I heard Judith's voice drifting from the hallway. She's too old to understand what's happening. By the time she figures it out, it'll be too late. Her words stung, but they also steeled my resolve. I would let them think they were winning, let them dig their own graves with every forged document and whispered scheme. Charles and Preston grew bolder in the days that followed, their confidence swelling with each small victory. They whispered in corners, made phone calls behind closed doors, and left papers lying around as if I were too blind to notice. I saw everything. I wrote it all down, recorded every conversation I could, and waited for the moment when their arrogance would be their undoing. Inside, I wrestled with my own doubts. Was I doing the right thing by letting this play out? Was I risking too much, letting Emily get hurt? But I reminded myself I could end this now. But Emily needs to see the truth. She needed to learn that not everyone who smiles at you is a friend, and that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can do the most harm. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was building a case that would destroy them completely. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in subtle cruelty. Judith and Charles, emboldened by their secret plot, became more brazen in their efforts to undermine me. Preston, always lurking in the background, grew more insistent, his charm sharpening into something colder. I felt the walls closing in, but I kept my mask in place, repeating my mantra, for Emily, I would wait. The charity gala was the first real test of my patience. It was an annual event, one I'd attended for years, but this time Judith was on the planning committee. She made sure my invitation arrived late, and when I entered the ballroom, I found myself seated at a table far from the stage, surrounded by strangers. Judith, in a glittering gown, floated from group to group, her laughter ringing out above the music. When she finally approached my table, she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and addressed the guests around us. "We're so grateful to have Maggie here tonight. She's been such a supporter of our community, even as she's adjusting to life on her own. It's not easy, is it, Maggie? But you're doing your best." Her words hung in the air, a velvet-wrapped dagger. The people at my table smiled politely, but I saw the pity in their eyes. I forced a smile, thanking Judith for her kind words, but inside, I was seething. I made a mental note of every face at the table, every witness to my public humiliation. Later, as I stood alone near the buffet, I overheard Judith whispering to a group of women, "It's so sad, really. Maggie's just not herself these days. I worry about her, living all alone in that big house. Maybe it's time she considered a retirement community." The women nodded, their eyes flicking to me with a mixture of sympathy and relief that it wasn't their problem. Meanwhile, Preston was working on Emily. He pulled her aside, his voice low and urgent. "Emily, I know this is hard, but your mom needs help. She's not as sharp as she used to be. If she signs over power of attorney, we can make sure she's taken care of. It's just a precaution." Emily looked torn, her eyes darting between Preston and me. "I don't know, Preston. She's always been so independent. I don't want to hurt her." Preston squeezed her hand, his tone soothing. "It's for her own good. Trust me, I've seen this before. People wait too long, and then it's too late." That night, Emily came to me, her face pale and anxious. "Mom, can we talk?" We sat in the quiet of my living room, the only light coming from the lamp by the window. She hesitated, twisting her hands in her lap. "Preston thinks it might be a good idea for you to sign over power of attorney, just in case something happens. I know you're fine, but maybe it's time for a change. You've done so much for me. Let us help you now." My heart broke a little at her words, but I kept my voice steady. "If it will make you feel better, Emily, I'll do it. I trust you." She hugged me, relief flooding her face. I held her close, fighting back tears. For Emily, I would wait. The next day, Preston arrived with a stack of documents. He explained each one slowly, as if I were a child, pausing to ask if I understood. "This is just a standard power of attorney form, Mrs. Ellison. It gives Emily the ability to make decisions if you're ever unable to. Nothing to worry about." I nodded, letting my hands tremble as I picked up the pen. But instead of my real signature, I wrote the name of a childhood friend, one I knew would never hold up in court. Preston didn't notice, too busy congratulating himself. "See, Emily? She trusts us. I told you I could handle it." After he left, I took photos of the documents, adding them to my growing file of evidence. I recorded every conversation, every whispered scheme, every attempt to push me aside. I watched as Emily grew more distant, her loyalty wavering under the weight of Preston's influence and Judith's constant suggestions. She started spending more time at the Whitaker home, helping Judith with charity events, listening to Preston's advice about her future. I saw the change in her eyes, the doubt, the worry, the fear that she was failing me. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Was it fair to let Emily be hurt, even if it was the only way she'd learn? But every time I considered ending the charade, I remembered the forged will, the whispered plans, the greed in Preston's eyes. I reminded myself, for Emily, I would wait. She needed to see their true nature, to understand what real love and loyalty looked like. Judith's public insults became more frequent, her corrections sharper. At a luncheon, she announced to the group, "Maggie's always been so independent, but we all need help eventually. It's nothing to be ashamed of." Preston dismissed my opinions on everything from investments to recipes, rolling his eyes and saying, "Don't worry. Emily, I'll take care of it." Emily, caught in the middle, looked at me with a mixture of love and confusion. I kept my mask in place, letting them believe I was exactly what they wanted me to be. I was no longer just protecting myself, I was protecting Emily's future, even if she couldn't see it yet. I was gathering evidence, building a case, and waiting for the moment when their arrogance would be their undoing. The day I'd been waiting for finally arrived. They were ready to make their final move, and I was ready to spring my trap. The day before the board meeting, the house felt emptier than ever. Emily barely spoke to me at breakfast, her eyes fixed on her phone, her answers clipped and distracted. I could feel the distance between us, a chasm widened by every whisper Preston had poured into her ear. When she finally looked up, her face was set with a determination I hadn't seen since she was a child. "Mom, I think it's time I moved out. Preston and I found a place. It's for the best. You'll be in good hands with him and his family helping you now?" I nodded, swallowing the ache in my chest. I wanted to reach across the table, to remind her of all the nights I'd stayed up with her when she was sick, all the sacrifices I'd made to give her a good life. But I just smiled, letting her believe I was resigned, defeated. "If that's what you think is best, Emily," I said softly. She squeezed my hand, but her eyes were already somewhere else. That afternoon, Judith called to check in. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but the message was clear. We're so glad Emily is finally taking charge, Maggie. It's time you let the next generation handle things. You can relax now. We'll take care of everything. I thanked her, my voice small and grateful, and hung up before she could hear the steel in my silence. Later, I watched from the window as Emily packed her car. Preston waiting in the driveway, his arm draped casually over the steering wheel. He didn't even look at me as Emily hugged me goodbye, her embrace quick and distracted. "I'll call you soon, Mom. Don't worry about anything." I watched them drive away, the weight of loneliness pressing down on me. For a moment, I let myself grieve, not just for Emily, but for the innocence she was about to lose. That evening, the Whitakers gathered in their living room, glasses of champagne in hand. Charles raised his glass, his voice booming with triumph. To new beginnings, and to finally getting what we deserve. She never suspected a thing. Judith laughed, her eyes glittering. It was almost too easy. Poor Maggie, so lost in her own little world. Preston grinned, clinking his glass against his father's. We're set for life. Once the board signs off tomorrow, it's all ours. They toasted, their voices echoing through the house that had once been filled with warmth and laughter. I watched them from the hallway, unseen, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a cold, steady resolve. They thought they'd won. They thought I was beaten, that I'd simply hand over everything I'd built, everything I'd saved for Emily's future. They had no idea what was coming. That night, I sat at my desk, surrounded by the evidence I'd gathered, recordings, photographs, copies of forged documents, and a detailed timeline of every scheme and insult. I called my attorney, a woman I'd mentored years ago, and confirmed that everything was in place for the morning. My legal team would be waiting, ready to step in at the right moment. I checked and rechecked every detail, my mind sharp and clear. As I prepared for bed, I allowed myself a moment of sadness for Emily, for the trust she'd misplaced, for the lesson she was about to learn the hard way. But I knew this was the only way. She needed to see the truth with her own eyes to understand the cost of misplaced trust. I whispered my mantra one last time before sleep. They have no idea what's about to happen. The board meeting was everything they'd planned, but it would be nothing like they expected. The boardroom was filled with the low hum of conversation and the clink of coffee cups. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the polished table where the fate of my life's work was about to be decided. Charles sat at the head, his posture regal, a stack of documents neatly arranged before him. Judith hovered nearby, her lips pursed in anticipation, while Preston lounged in his chair, tapping his pen with barely contained excitement. Emily sat at the far end, her face pale, eyes darting between me and the Whitakers, uncertainty clouding her features. Charles cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention. "Let's get started, shall we? Maggie, if you'll just sign here, we can finalize the transfer. It's all very straightforward, but if you have any questions, I'll be happy to explain the paperwork." His tone was patronizing, the same syrupy condescension he'd used since the day we met. Judith smiled, her eyes cold. "After this, Maggie, you can finally relax. Maybe even look into that retirement home we talked about. You've earned a rest." I looked down at the pen in my hand, then at the faces around the table. For a moment I let the silence stretch, watching their confidence swell. I could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on me, the certainty that I would simply comply, that I was too old, too tired, too simple to fight back. Then, slowly, I stood. I slipped off my old faded sweater, revealing a crisp, tailored blouse beneath. My voice, when it came, was steady and clear, carrying across the room with a quiet authority none of them had ever heard before. "I won't be signing anything today," I said, meeting Charles's eyes, "because I am Margaret Ellison, founder and majority shareholder of this firm. My name is on the founding documents, framed, I believe, in your own office, Charles. I built this company from the ground up, and I have no intention of handing it over to anyone, least of all to those who would steal it through lies and forgery." The room fell silent. Charles's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. Judith's hand trembled, the folder she was holding slipping from her grasp and scattering papers across the table. Preston sat up straight, his confidence evaporating in an instant. At that moment, the doors opened and my legal team entered, 3 sharp-suited professionals, each carrying a briefcase. The board members, who had been watching the proceedings with polite disinterest, now leaned forward, sensing the shift in power. My attorney, Ms. Patel, placed a thick folder in front of me and addressed the room. "We have evidence of attempted fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft, all perpetrated by Charles, Judith, and Preston Whitaker." I placed my credentials on the table, the company logo gleaming on the cover. "For years, I've managed more than just bills. I've protected assets, negotiated contracts, and outsmarted people far more cunning than you. And I've documented every conversation, every forged document, every attempt to push me out of my own life." Charles tried to recover, his voice shaky. "This is absurd. Maggie, you're confused. You don't understand what's at stake here." I turned to him, my gaze unwavering. "On the contrary, Charles, I understand perfectly. You offered to explain the paperwork, but you never imagined I was the one who wrote it. And Judith, you suggested a retirement home. Perhaps you should start looking for one yourself." The boardroom was silent, the power dynamic shifting in an instant. For the first time, they saw me, not as a frail old woman, but as the force I truly was. Emily stared at me, shock and confusion warring on her face. The other board members exchanged glances, some with dawning respect, others with open astonishment. Preston stammered, This can't be right. I cut him off with a calm smile. "I am the majority shareholder. I am the founder, and I am the woman you've underestimated at every turn." The silence was absolute, the room frozen as the truth settled over them. I could see the realization dawning in their eyes, the understanding that everything they thought they knew had just been turned upside down. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I let the silence linger, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. Then, with a calmness I'd honed over decades, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small digital recorder. I pressed play, and the boardroom filled with the unmistakable voices of Charles and Preston. "We need to get her signature on the trust transfer by the end of the month," Charles's voice crackled through the speaker. "Every word clear. If we wait any longer, she might get suspicious. Preston, you'll handle the paperwork. Make it look official. She's too old to understand the difference." Preston's reply was just as damning. "She'll never know. I'll draft the documents tonight. All we need is her signature, and the shares are as good as ours. Emily won't question it if it looks legitimate." A stunned hush fell over the room. Charles's face drained of color, and Preston's bravado vanished, replaced by a look of pure panic. Judith's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. I paused the recording and looked each of them in the eye. "That was just one conversation," I said, my voice steady. "There are more. Every meeting, every whispered scheme, every attempt to push me aside, I documented it all." I slid a stack of photographs across the table. "These are images of the forged will I found in Preston's briefcase. Note the signature, an obvious imitation of mine. The language is clear. All my assets, including my shares in this firm, would transfer to Emily, but with Preston named as sole trustee. In effect, he would control everything." Preston tried to speak, but his voice faltered. "This is a misunderstanding. Ms. Patel, my attorney, cut him off. "We also have statements from staff and notaries who were approached to witness the transfer. They refused, of course, and reported the attempt to our office. Here are their signed testimonies." She handed copies to the board members, who read in growing disbelief. Judith's composure cracked. "You can't prove anything. This is all circumstantial," I turned to her, my eyes unwavering. "You corrected me in front of everyone, Judith. You made sure I looked weak, confused, incapable. But I was documenting every word, every humiliation, every attempt to undermine me. And now so is everyone else in this room." Charles, desperate, tried to regain control. "Maggie, you're making a mistake. This will ruin the firm's reputation." I shook my head. "No, Charles. You did that the moment you decided to steal from your own partner. You offered to explain the paperwork, but you never imagined I was the one who wrote it. You thought I was too old to understand, too simple to fight back. But I've been 10 steps ahead of you from the start." The board members exchanged glances, some with dawning respect, others with open disgust for the Whitakers. Emily sat frozen, her eyes wide with shock as the truth unraveled before her. Preston's denial grew weaker. This isn't what it looks like. I was just trying to help. I met his gaze, my voice gentle but unyielding. You were trying to help yourself, Preston. And you almost succeeded. But you underestimated me, just like your parents did. The evidence was overwhelming, each piece a nail in the coffin of their scheme. The Whitakers' panic was palpable, their denials growing more desperate with every passing second. I remained calm, professional, and unflinching. The years of experience and strategy finally revealed for all to see. Of course, documentation wasn't my only preparation. The boardroom, once filled with polite chatter and self-assured laughter, now buzzed with disbelief and outrage. As the evidence was laid bare, a ripple of gasps and murmurs swept through the assembled partners and community members who had been invited to witness the historic transfer. I watched as faces turned from the Whitakers to me, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock, then to something like admiration. One of the senior partners, a man who had always nodded politely but never truly seen me, shook his head in disbelief. I can't believe they tried to scam her, after everything she's done for this firm. Another board member, who had once dismissed my suggestions in meetings, leaned over to a colleague and whispered, "She's been playing them this whole time?" Judith, who had always prided herself on her social standing, looked around for support and found none. The women who had once flocked to her at charity luncheons now avoided her gaze, their faces a mix of pity and disgust. Preston, who had so often flaunted his expensive watch and car keys, now sat hunched in his chair, his status symbols suddenly meaningless. Even Charles, who had built his reputation on confidence and charm, seemed to shrink under the weight of the truth. I let the silence linger before I spoke again, my voice calm and clear. "You know, Judith, that charity gala where you so kindly suggested I look into retirement homes? I own that venue. In fact, I've sponsored it for years. Every invitation you sent out, every event you planned, happened because I allowed it." The realization hit her like a slap, her cheeks flushing with humiliation. The room erupted in whispers, and I saw several people pull out their phones, already typing messages and snapping photos. Social media lit up within minutes. "Did you hear what happened at Whitaker & Associates? Turns out Maggie Ellison is the real power behind the firm. Judith and Charles tried to steal from her. Unbelievable. Invitations that once flowed freely to the Whitakers dried up overnight. Their names, once synonymous with influence and respect, became a warning whispered at dinner tables and in private messages. Emily, her earlier doubts now replaced by a mix of shame and awe, looked at me with new eyes. The power had shifted completely. The people who had tried to make me feel small were suddenly the smallest people in the room. As the meeting ended, people approached me with apologies and respect. Some offered quiet words of support, others simply nodded, acknowledging the truth they had ignored for so long. The Whitakers, once the center of every social circle, found themselves standing alone, the room parting around them like water around a stone. Judith's public insult at the gala, Preston's smug dismissal of my old-fashioned ways, Emily's hesitant, "Maybe it's time for a change," all of it was reversed in a single stunning afternoon. The status symbols they had clung to so tightly now looked cheap and hollow. My quiet strength, once overlooked, was suddenly the only thing that mattered. But social consequences were just the beginning. The aftermath of the board meeting was swift and merciless. As the last of the evidence was presented, the doors to the conference room opened and 2 uniformed police officers entered, their presence sending a fresh wave of shock through the crowd. The officers moved with quiet authority, their eyes fixed on Charles, Judith, and Preston. The room fell silent as one officer stepped forward, reading from a prepared statement. "Charles Whitaker, Judith Whitaker, Preston Whitaker, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Judith gasped, her composure finally shattering. "This is a mistake. We're respected members of this community," she cried, but the officers were unmoved. Charles tried to protest, but his words were lost in the flurry of activity as the officers placed him in handcuffs. Preston, pale and shaking, looked to his parents for help, but found only fear and disbelief. My legal team, led by Ms. Patel, stepped forward to address the board and the assembled witnesses. "We have been working with law enforcement for weeks," she explained, her voice steady and professional. "Every document, every recording, every witness statement has been verified. The forged will, the fraudulent power of attorney, the attempts to manipulate Mrs. Ellison's finances, there is no doubt about their intent or their guilt." As the officers led the Whitakers away, another member of my legal team handed me a list of their frozen assets. Their accounts are locked, their properties flagged for seizure. Any attempt to transfer funds or sell assets will be blocked by court order. The finality in her voice was unmistakable. Charles's career, once the envy of the legal community, was over in an instant. His name was stripped from the firm's letterhead, his license suspended pending trial. Judith's social calendar, once filled with galas and luncheons, was suddenly empty. Preston, who had always relied on his family's influence, found himself blacklisted from every reputable firm in the city. Their reputations, so carefully cultivated, were destroyed in a single afternoon. The board members, who had once looked to Charles for leadership, now turned to me. Some offered apologies, others simply nodded in respect. The message was clear. The era of the Whitakers was over. Emily, standing off to the side, watched the scene unfold with tears in her eyes. Ms. Patel approached her gently. "Emily, you are not under investigation. There is no evidence you participated in their crimes. But you will need to answer some questions, and you'll have to live with the choices you made." I watched as the people who had tried to steal my life's work were led out in handcuffs, their futures as empty as the promises they'd made. Justice, at last, was not just a word but a reality. The law, which they had twisted for their own gain, had finally turned against them. As they were led away, I turned to the person who mattered most. As the police led the Whitakers away, the room buzzed with a new kind of energy, one that was equal parts relief and curiosity. But I wasn't finished. I had promised myself that justice would be thorough, not just for me and Emily, but for anyone else who had suffered at the hands of people like Charles. Judith and Preston. Miss Patel nodded to the back of the room, and my private investigator, Mr. Harris, stepped forward. He was a quiet man, unassuming in his gray suit, but his eyes were sharp and his file was thick. He cleared his throat and addressed the board, his voice steady and precise. "In the course of our investigation, we uncovered a disturbing pattern. The Whitakers have orchestrated similar schemes in 3 other towns over the past decade. Each time they targeted widows or elderly homeowners, offering help with bills and paperwork, only to forge documents and siphon away assets." He opened the folder, revealing statements from prior victims, women and men who had lost their homes, their savings, even their sense of security. One letter read, "I trusted Charles when he said he was just here to help. I never imagined he'd take everything from me." Another, shakier hand had written, "Judith made me feel like family, then left me with nothing." The pain in those words was unmistakable, and I felt a surge of vindication knowing their stories would finally be heard. Mr. Harris continued, "We have evidence of forged signatures, fraudulent trusts, and even attempts to manipulate medical records to declare some victims incompetent. In each case, the Whitakers used their legal knowledge and social standing to isolate their targets, then moved in for the kill. They were careful, but not careful enough. Several board members gasped, and a few exchanged horrified glances. The room, which had once been a stage for the Whitakers' arrogance, was now a court of reckoning. "We've already contacted authorities in those towns," Mr. Harris said. "Some of the victims are here today, ready to testify. Others have sent written statements. The pattern is clear. This was not a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a way of life." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had doubted me, those who had once believed Charles' earliest dismissals. "She's just a nobody." Now, the truth was undeniable. The Whitakers' crimes were not just against me, but against a whole community of people who had trusted them, only to be betrayed. One of the prior victims, a woman with silver hair and trembling hands, stood up and spoke. "Thank you, Mrs. Ellison. You did what none of us could. You stopped them." Her voice was soft, but the gratitude in her eyes was fierce. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. "No one is a nobody," I said quietly. "Not in my world. Not ever again." The boardroom, once a place of secrets and schemes, was now filled with the light of truth. The Whitakers' pattern of villainy was exposed for all to see, and the justice that began with my family would ripple outward, bringing closure and hope to others who had suffered in silence. But there was still one person I needed to address. The boardroom slowly emptied, the echoes of the day's revelations lingering in the air. I stood by the window, watching the last of the police cars pull away, my heart heavy but steady. Emily lingered near the door, her hands twisting nervously, her eyes red from tears she'd tried to hide. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick with everything that had gone unsaid. Finally, Emily crossed the room, her voice trembling. "Mom, I don't even know where to start. I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have seen what they were doing, but I didn't want to believe it. I let Preston and his family turn me against you. I let them make me doubt my own mother." I turned to her, taking her hands in mine. They were cold, shaking with the weight of her regret. "Emily, you're my daughter. I know your heart. You wanted to believe the best in people, and that's not a weakness. But sometimes people hide who they really are behind pretty words and smiles. I needed you to see that for yourself. If I'd told you everything from the start, you might never have believed me. Some lessons have to be lived to be learned." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was so blind. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just making it easier for them to hurt you. I don't know how to make it right." I brushed the hair from her forehead, just as I had when she was a little girl. "You make it right by learning from it, by remembering that character matters more than appearance, and that love isn't proven by words, but by actions. You trusted the wrong people, but you're here now. That's what matters." She pulled me into a fierce hug, holding on as if she might never let go. "I promise, Mom, I'll never let anyone come between us again. I'll be more careful. I'll listen. I'll trust you." I held her close, feeling the years of worry and heartache melt away. "We all make mistakes, Emily. What matters is that we learn and grow. I love you, and nothing will ever change that." She nodded, wiping her eyes, a small, grateful smile breaking through the sadness. "I love you too, Mom. Thank you for protecting me, even when I didn't deserve it." We sat together in the quiet, the bond between us stronger than it had ever been. Emily's voice was soft but determined. "I want to do better, Mom. I want to be the kind of person who sees through the surface, who doesn't get fooled by charm or status. I want to be more like you." I smiled, pride swelling in my chest. "You already are, Emily. You just needed to see it for yourself. The world is full of people who will try to take advantage of your kindness. But that doesn't mean you should stop being kind. It just means you need to be wise, too." She nodded, her eyes shining with new understanding. "I will, I promise." We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the city. The storm had passed, and in its wake we found forgiveness, understanding, and a new beginning. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew we would face them together, stronger and wiser than before. In the aftermath, justice continued to unfold. 6 months passed, and the world that had once revolved around the Whitakers was unrecognizable. The headlines that had once celebrated their charity work and social standing now chronicled their downfall. Charles, Judith, and Preston were each convicted on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The judge, unmoved by their tears or excuses, handed down sentences that would keep them behind bars for years. Their assets, what little remained after the courts finished, were seized and liquidated, the proceeds distributed among their victims. Their names became a warning whispered at dinner tables and in church pews, a lesson in greed and arrogance that no one in town would soon forget. Charles, once the face of Whitaker and Associates, now spent his days in a modest cell, his appeals denied, his reputation in tatters. Judith, who had once ruled the social calendar, found herself shunned by the very women who had once vied for her approval. She wrote letters from prison, but few were answered. Preston, stripped of his law license and his family's protection, struggled to find work, his arrogance replaced by a bitterness that aged him overnight. He was last seen working at a small print shop in a neighboring town, a far cry from the boardrooms he once dreamed of ruling. The firm itself underwent a transformation. With the Whitakers gone, the board voted to restore my name to the founding documents, and I was asked to serve as chairwoman, at least until a new generation of honest leaders could be trained. I accepted, not out of pride, but out of duty, to ensure that what I had built would never again be threatened by greed. The staff, once wary of my quiet presence, now sought my advice and guidance. I mentored young lawyers, especially women, teaching them not just the law, but the importance of integrity and vigilance. Emily, too, changed in ways I hadn't dared hope. She threw herself into her work, taking on new responsibilities and earning the respect of her colleagues. She started volunteering at the very charity where Judith had once tried to humiliate me, determined to give back and rebuild her sense of purpose. She apologized to those she'd hurt with her blind trust, and over time, people forgave her. I watched her grow into a woman who valued character over charm, substance over surface. The story of what happened became something of a local legend. How the helpless widow outsmarted two seasoned con artists and protected not just her own family, but others as well. Other victims of the Whitakers' schemes received compensation, and some even found the courage to start over. The community, once divided by gossip and suspicion, came together in support and solidarity. I found myself invited to speak at gatherings, to share what I'd learned about patience, vigilance, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing your own worth. There were moments of unexpected grace, too. One afternoon, a woman I'd never met approached me at the market, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You saved my mother's home," she said simply. "Thank you." I realized then that justice, when done right, ripples outward, touching lives you may never know. As for me, life returned to a quieter, steadier rhythm. My business, which I'd quietly resumed consulting for, flourished as word spread of my ordeal and my resolve. Neighbors who once pitied me now greeted me with respect, and friends who had kept their distance returned with warmth and admiration. I spent more time in my garden, savoring the peace I'd fought so hard to reclaim. Emily and I grew closer than ever, our bond forged anew in the fires of adversity. The Whitakers' downfall was complete, but I took no pleasure in their suffering. Justice was never about revenge, it was about restoration, about making things right for those who had been wronged. I used what I'd learned to help others, to teach, to mentor, to remind people that strength often wears a quiet face. Looking back now, I realize how close I came to losing everything that mattered. Not just my home or my savings, but the trust and love of my only daughter. If this ordeal taught me anything, it's that patience and preparation are not weaknesses. They are the quiet strengths that carry us through life's hardest storms. I learned to trust my instincts even when others tried to make me doubt myself. Every uneasy feeling, every small red flag was a warning I was wise to heed. I want anyone listening to remember, never let someone else define your worth. People will try to put you in a box, to tell you you're too old, too soft, too naive. But your experience, your wisdom, and your love are powerful beyond measure. Document everything, protect yourself, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. But above all, believe in your own strength, even when others don't. Character always reveals itself in the end. The world may value appearances, but it's what's inside that endures. I watched my daughter learn that lesson the hard way, and I hope you never have to. But if you do, know that you are not alone, and you are stronger than you think. Now when I sit with Emily in the garden, laughter and trust restored between us, I feel a peace I haven't known in years. We are both wiser, both changed, and both grateful for a second chance. They thought I was nobody. I showed them that nobody beats a mother protecting her family.